Well, in my presentation, I would like to draw attention to some similarities in the views of Tadeusz Czeżowski and Roman Ingarden on values and metaphysics, and give some reasons why the views of Czeżowski and Ingarden may be regarded as compatible with theism, which I understand as the thesis that there is a personal God, though their views are not compatible with the so-called classical theism. So the order of my presentation is as follows. First, I will provide brief information about Czeżowski and the personal relations between Czeżowski and Ingarden. Secondly, I will discuss some of the main similarities between Czeżowski's and Ingarden views. Thirdly, I will present the theories of values offered by Czeżowski and by Ingarden. Next, I will discuss the concepts of metaphysical cognition. And finally, I will try to justify the thesis that the philosophy of Czeżowski and Ingarden is compatible with theism, although it does not imply theism. They are compatible, but they do not imply theism, these philosophies. So part one, personal relations between Czeżowski and Ingarden. Let me start with very short information about Czeżowski itself. Tadeusz Czeżowski was born in Vienna in 1889 and died in Toruń, in Poland, in 1981. In 1907, he enrolled at the Faculty of Philosophy of the University of Lvov to study philosophy, mathematics, and physics. Under Twardowski's supervision, he wrote his dissertation in Polish, Teoria Klas, the theory of classes, for which he obtained his doctoral degree in 1914. During the Polish-Soviet War in 1920, he was a soldier and he was awarded for courage. In 1923, Czeżowski was offered the chair of philosophy at the University of Vilnius, which became vacant at that time, and he accepted that proposal. It is worth mentioning that during the German occupation, Czeżowski saved the lives of many Jewish people, for which in 1963 he was awarded the title of Righteous Among the Nations by Yad Vashem Institute, together with his wife Antonina and their daughter Teresa. And in 2012, he posthumously obtained the honorary citizenship of Israel. After the war, Czeżowski had to leave the University of Vilnius, and like other professors of that university, he was moved to a newly established University of Toruń, now Nicolaus Copernicus University, becoming one of its main organizers. In total, he was the author of some 190 scientific publications, including his philosophical books, Odczyty filozoficzne, philosophical lectures in English, Filozofia na rozdrożu, Philosophy at the Crossroads, Główne zasady nauk filozoficznych, The Main Principles of Philosophical Sciences, and an advanced handbook on logica. It is worth noting that during the years of the communist regime, which started in Poland immediately after the war, Czeżowski, till his death, refused any awards offered by the communist state. Czeżowski had very close relations with Roman Ingarden, especially after the Second World War. The relations between the two philosophers were, we could say, very friendly and lasted until Ingarden's death. This is evidenced by the letters they wrote to each other. In the archives of Nicolaus Copernicus University in Toruń, there are about 100 letters from Ingarden to Czeżowski. That these were cordial relations can be inferred from the way they addressed each other. For example, Czeżowski begins one of his letters to Ingarden as follows: Beloved, dearest Roman, kochany Romanie, in Polish. which may seem overly emotional today, but was a common form in those days, however, only when relations was truly close and cordial. So they like each other, but it must be stressed that they also respected each other's philosophical achievements. Ingarden recommended Czeżowski's textbook, The Principles of Philosophy, to his students. He wrote to Czeżowski in one of his letters, let me quote, "I have read the main principles and I find it is a useful textbook, although I would try to present some matters differently, but that it's natural. I have recommended your textbook to young people on many occasions." Czeżowski, in turn, during his seminars, discussed with his students spór o istnienie świata, the controversy over the existence of the world. Referring to that, Ingarden wrote, let me quote, "I am very glad that you are reading my spór at the seminar. Both the first and the second volume of the controversy were reviewed by Czeżowski. In one of the reviews, Ingarden's work is described by Czeżowski as follows: insightful, exhaustive, inventive analysis, but they also require great patience from the reader. The fact that the relations between the two philosophers were very friendly is worth noting, especially when we remember that Ingarden disagreed on many fundamental issues with the logicians from the Lvov-Warsaw school, to whom Czeżowski belonged. Likewise, Czeżowski did not accept the essential premises and claims of phenomenology. This, however, did not prevent him from pointing out in his review of the book by Martha Neal and William Neal, The Development of Logic, that the authors completely ignored the achievements of Edmund Husserl and Franz Brentano. Czeżowski regarded Husserl's formal ontology as a modern continuation of the classical metaphysics understood as the first philosophy. Czeżowski compared Husserl's insight into the essence of things to intuitive generalization, which was an integral part of the method of analytical description that he himself used. He regarded Husserl, next to Henri Bergson and William James, as one of the main representatives of intuitionist metaphysics, and he considered the phenomenological intuition to be an important way of how we come to know the reality. Czeżowski was, if not the first, then certainly one of the first who saw the need to use modern logic in phenomenological research. He believed that Ingarden's methods of resolving the dispute between realism and idealism by purely conceptual considerations was fundamentally wrong. According to Czeżowski, the only way to confirm the existence of the world is by reasoning based on perceptual experience. Let us focus now on the similarities between the two philosophers and some differences. Well, despite the above-mentioned methodological differences, Czeżowski and Ingarden shared the view that the existence of the time-space world and the axiological world of moral and aesthetic values are independent of the human mind. Czeżowski justified the thesis about the existence of the world rather by induction, unlike Ingarden, who used conceptual analysis, as I said. When justifying the thesis of the world's existence, Czeżowski refers to the methods of natural sciences. Scientists treat the thesis about the existence of the external world as a conclusion of reasoning, the premises of which are propositions based on the perception of physical phenomena. However, Ingarden accuses scientists of committing a logical error consisting in the fact that the premises of reasoning already contain the conclusion. In Czeżowski's opinion, that is not a valid objection, because a more detailed analysis of the reasoning does not show there is this assumption in the premises. The premises can be generally represented by the proposition there is such and such a phenomenon. Propositions of this type are singular propositions, and they are not justified by a general proposition asserting the existence of a whole consisting of all individual phenomena about which singular propositions speak. It is the other way around, namely the singular propositions justify the general proposition the world exists, where the world is an aggregate or collection of objects or phenomena, or as Barry Smith suggests, systems. Well, when it comes to axiological realism, both Ingarden and Czeżowski refer to the existence of a special kind of experience by which we can know different kinds of values. That recognition of the existence of axiological experience can be treated as a result of the influence of phenomenology on Czeżowski's thought, in my opinion at least. Both Czeżowski and Ingarden do not treat values as properties of objects. I believe that the non-predicative ontology of values put forward by Czeżowski and partially by Ingarden are original proposals in ontology of values, not only within Polish philosophy, but perhaps philosophy in general. Therefore, now I will briefly present Czeżowski's and Ingarden theories of values. Czeżowski defends a version of axiological realism, which is an original combination of the medieval metaphysics, Brentanism, and non-naturalism. Czeżowski formulated at least two arguments against the predicative conception of values. First, since axiological sentences are true or false, as Czeżowski claimed, then they are, according to the Brentanian ontology, expressions of axiological judgments. The nature of judgment is explained by Czeżowski in terms of the idiogenic theory of judgment, which embraces two essential claims. The first is that, each judgment is reducible to an existential judgment, that is to a judgment asserting the existence of an object of presentation. And second, a claim of this theory is that no judgment is a combination of a subject and a predicate. An axiological judgment does not assert the existence of an object because it asserts only its value. An axiological judgment as a judgment is not a combination of a subject and a predicate. It follows from this that the judgment A is good does not contain any predicate. The word good, according to the idiogenic theory of judgment, is only an apparent predicate. The same may be said about the word beautiful and its synonyms. Well, the second reason was provided by the analysis of the syntactic structure of expressions composed of such words as true, good, necessary, beautiful. According to that analysis, existence and values are not properties because they are not symbolized in language by predicates. Such words as true, good, necessary, beautiful are only morphologically similar to predicates, but in fact they are not predicates. They are propositional operators because they occur in such constructions as, for example, it is necessary that, it is good that, it's beautiful that, or it is true that, and then follows a sentence. Thus, Czeżowski's view is that such expressions as exists, valuable, good, beautiful, but also necessary and possible are not predicates, and therefore they do not denote any properties of things, state of affairs, individuals. However, sentences containing them are not necessarily false because they assert what was called in the Middle Ages modes of beings, modi entis, modi essendi in Latin. And Czeżowski regards modi entis, modi essendi as transcendentalia or transcendental concepts. Transcendentalia do not belong to the description of an object, that is, they do not determine universals and cannot be defined. In Brentanian terms, they cannot be presented, and hence they are no properties in Czeżowski's ontology of value. What is important? Czeżowski followed here not Thomas Aquinas, but Duns Scotus by claiming that transcendental concepts are disjunctive. But Czeżowski, we can say, also denied Duns Scotus's theory when saying that being and values are disjunctive because they can be negated. The negation of goodness is evil, and the negation of beauty is ugliness. He suspended also the thesis that transcendental concepts, for example, being and goodness, are convertible. The question about convertibility of transcendental concepts may be answered empirically by means of experience and not by any form of deduction. In sum, the essential role in the controversy between non-naturalistic realism and anti-realism is played by the claim that values, goodness, beauty, are not objects' properties. Therefore, goodness and beauty cannot be identical with any natural property or with any natural fact. However, truthfulness, kindness, sacrifice, justice, faithfulness, harmony, etc., are not values like goodness and beauty, but they are properties, and as Czeżowski calls them, they are criteria of goodness, criteria of evil, or criteria of beauty, or more generally, criteria of values. And now some words about Ingarden. Ingarden uses a number of terms related to value. He talks about the ideas of value, the ideal qualities of values, values in concreto and in individuo, the matter of values, and the Wertigkeit der Werten, wartościowość wartości. Unfortunately, I could not find the English translation of this expression from German into English. Maybe someone can help me here. What is Wertigkeit der Werte in English? A value in concreto is any value predicated of an individual object. Concrete values are neither objects because they are dependent on the value bearers, nor properties because if a value were a property, it could not be possessed by physical objects having only physical properties. Values cannot be reduced to any relation between a certain individual or a social subject and the object evaluated, because this would imply relativism. But only some values, according to Ingarden, are related. Values cannot be characterized by existential categories, that is, by Ingarden's modes of existence, because the way aesthetic values exist is different from the way moral values exist. And according to Ingarden, values have modes of existence other than real, ideal, or intentional. And the ways how values exist have to be discovered because they are not known yet, in fact. Ingarden's ontology of value is therefore more negative than positive, but it is not entirely negative. We know of values that, quote, value arises from the very essence of an object, unquote, and that it is determined by its properties along with its Wertigkeit. We also know that values are positive and negative, and that an object with positive values obtains a certain dignitas by possessing them. The realization, or in German Realisierung or Konkretisierung, of moral values presupposes the real existence of free and responsible human actions. And this may lead to the recognition of the real world in which there are causal relations and interactions between person and her or his environment. I think it could be regarded as a way to solve the problem of existence of the real world, not by conceptual analysis, but by axiological experience. And now some word about Czeżowski on metaphysics. Czeżowski's Metaphilosophy is clearly scientific. In that respect, Czeżowski was a faithful student of Kazimierz Twardowski. According to both philosophers, philosophy is to be a science and should cooperate with natural sciences. However, Czeżowski's metaphilosophical scientism is connected with the classical, I would say, prepositivist and even pre-Kantian understanding of philosophy as a science about all reality, about, quote, the totality of being, unquote. In such philosophy, Czeżowski sees the important role of axiology, and within the latter, the important role of knowledge about values. Because our relationship with being, he says, understood as God or nature, becomes close not only through descriptive, but also through axiological knowledge, through knowing the value of reality. Knowing the value of reality is part of our knowing reality, and our knowing of reality leads to some metaphysical beliefs. So metaphysical beliefs are intersubjectively verifiable and communicable. It was Czeżowski's view. Thus, metaphysics as science about the totality of being is possible. And the idea of metaphysical experience understood as an axiological interpretation of the whole universe was later developed by Marian Przełęcki. And now Ingarden on metaphysics. In Ingarden's philosophy, there are two concepts of metaphysics. The first is related to his conception of ontology as a science of pure possibilities. Metaphysics in this ontological context should provide answers to the questions which of these possibilities are realized, whether the real world exists independently of pure consciousness, and so on. The second, I would say, less official concept of metaphysics is related to Ingarden's axiology and the existence of metaphysical experiences, in which we learn what Ingarden calls metaphysical qualities. It is important notion in Ingarden's theory of art, but not only theory of art, also in metaphysics, as I think. Metaphysical qualities reveal the primordial source of being and represent, as he called it, the world of higher powers. Examples of metaphysical qualities include the loftiness of someone's sacrifice, the meanness of betrayal, the tragedy of someone's defeat, the horror of someone's evil deeds, the sanctity or sinfulness of someone's life, or the ecstatic nature of someone's delight. These all are Ingarden's examples. Ingarden says that we do not experience metaphysical qualities too often in the circumstances of everyday life, but much more often such experiences happen to us. It's important to say happen to us, thanks to great works of art. On that occasion, we find that metaphysical qualities reveal to us the deeper meaning of life and of reality in general. Metaphysical qualities constitute this hidden meaning and reveal the primordial source of being, and represent, quote, as I said, the world of higher powers, unquote. Well, the existence of metaphysical qualities and of the world of higher powers has the effect that humans do not feel at home in the world of nature. Because humans are radically different from animals, we are able to create culture and experience metaphysical qualities, contrary to animals. However, we do not feel quite at home in the world of culture as well, because the world of culture and art reveals metaphysical qualities that lead to the world of higher powers, to use Ingarden's expressions, over which humans have no control, according to him. All this may sound a bit mysterious, and perhaps this view only expresses Ingarden's fascinations with Rilke's poetry. But one cannot exclude that there may be something deeper at play here. And finally, let me consider the problem of Czeżowski's and Ingarden's views on the existence of God, and whether their views are compatible with theism. As to Czeżowski's views concerning God's existence, we can find only sparse and brief references to this subject in his writings, which is not surprising. In Czeżowski's opinion, it is impossible to prove the existence of God inductively by generalizing individual observations, because we do not have any observations of personal divinity. There are no valid deductive proofs either. Although what is significant, Czeżowski does not exclude the possibility of formulating such proofs in the future. But he considers the ontological argument to be fundamentally wrong. In his brief and few remarks concerning the existence of God, Czeżowski does not refer to the inference to the best explanation either. By contrast, Ingarden speaks of God in the controversy over the existence of the world as a being which is absolute and which is a radical essence, to use his technical terms. In the conclusion of this work, he presents a creationist position, assuming the existence of an absolute being on which human consciousness and the real world are dependent, because human consciousness and the world are, to use classical concept, contingent. This conclusion in Ingarden's work does not seem original. It resembles the argument from a necessary being and is based on a logical fallacy, the fallacy of composition. According to Ingarden ontological analysis, every individual object existing in time is contingent. This also applies to the human mind, pure consciousness, and so on. And hence, the whole composed of such objects, that is, the real world, is contingent too. And therefore, it refers to the necessary being, to an absolute being, to use Ingarden's terminology. Some people try to support theism by appealing, in Ingarden's Metaphysics, by appealing to the experience of metaphysical qualities, which has been mentioned above, and which should reveal the source and the sense of reality. But the experience of metaphysical qualities, in my opinion, is not sufficient to conclude that there is an absolute personal being, which is traditionally called God. The nature itself and human products can be the bearers of metaphysical qualities about which Ingarden is speaking. To sum up, Ingarden's and Czeżowski's contributions to the reflection on the nature and existence of God, it should be noted that Ingarden considered the idea of absolute being as coherent. Similar to Czeżowski, who allowed for the possibility of formulating a formally correct deductive proof of God's existence, although he himself did not provide any such proof. Someone might say that these are not great contributions to the metaphysics of God, but firstly, these contributions must be assessed in the historical context. Secondly, none of them aimed at defending and developing theistic metaphysics, perhaps because philosophy should be ideologically neutral, as Boss claimed. As to the historical context, it is worth remembering that both Ingarden and Czeżowski were active in the times of politically dominating Marxist atheism, still influential neo-positivism, not to mention the metaphilosophy of the Lvov-Warsaw school and the key premises of phenomenology, which taken together did not create an encouraging background to develop an interesting and systematic metaphysics of God. However, Ingarden does make several interesting remarks about divinity, to my mind. First, in the controversy over the existence of the world, Volume 1, Ingarden seems to reject the doctrine of continuous creation, creatio continua, because if God existed, the necessity to sustain the created world in existence would testify to God's powerlessness and therefore his imperfection. It's Ingarden remarks. I think that Ingarden is absolutely right here. But the rejection of creatio continua is a rejection of a very important component of traditional classical theism. To my mind, almost all contemporary theists defend the view that God sustains the world in existence. Ingarden's second remark concerns his rejection of theistic Platonism, which was defended, for example, by Augustine and in the Lvov-Warsaw school by Jan Łukasiewicz. Ingarden says that it is possible to treat ideas and ideal abstract objects, mathematical objects included, not as God's thoughts, but rather as something independent and uncreated by God. And he firmly states that it would be fundamentally wrong to think of abstract objects as divine thoughts or something created by God. But he adds that one should not get involved in theological matters. And he stops his considerations on this topic at this moment. The above claim may be regarded as corresponding to the view held by contemporary theists, for example, Molinists, who believe in the counterfactuals of freedom, counterfactuals of quantum physics, and ideal essences which have not been created by God and over which God has no control. It should also be added that Ingarden rejects both the doctrine of God's simplicity, because every individual object consists of the substrate of properties, and it concerns also God, and the doctrine of Thomas Aquinas about God as the pure act of existence. And if I'm right about metaphysical qualities, Ingarden rejects the thesis of the classical theistic metaphysics that every being is good. If we take all this into account, Ingarden's view on God, although not systematically elaborated, seems to be quite original. Surely his theism is not classical theism, but it is not a version of an open theism, Molinism, or process theism either. Whether Ingarden's views represent a coherent theistic position is another problem. In order to evaluate the coherence of Ingarden's views, an analysis based on more data would be required, which data are difficult to find in Ingarden's works. However, even if we limit ourselves to analyzing his occasional and brief remarks, his position does not seem coherent, but it can easily be made coherent simply by rejecting the thesis that there are uncreated abstract objects. And then I hope it could work. Besides those directly theological matters, there are certain elements of Czeżowski's and Ingarden's philosophy which are important for theistic metaphysics. Despite some differences, both philosophers assume the reliability of our cognitive powers, such as perception, intellectual intuition, inference, knowledge of values, and metaphysical experience understood as a cognition of the value of reality. They also assume the difference between the physical and the mental. Perhaps this is the difference. This is a difference to be considered in terms of dualism. Whether it is a substance dualism or property dualism is another question. Both Czeżowski and Ingarden presuppose human abilities and needs to create works of art, literature, music, or poetry. And last but not least, they both assume the mind's intentionality consisting in the direct grasping of the object itself, as Czeżowski understood it. If all these remarks are taken into account, in my opinion, Ingarden's and even Czeżowski's views can be considered perfectly compatible with theistic metaphysics, although not with the classical theism. However, as I said at the beginning, even though Czeżowski's and Ingarden's metaphysics is compatible with theism, this does not imply that God exists, nor does it provide any argument for the existence of God. The truth that 2 plus 2 is 4 is also compatible with theism, and it is not an argument for God's existence. But it remains an open question whether Czeżowski's and Ingarden claims about human higher cognitive abilities and real achievements in creating culture and science are truly compatible with metaphysical naturalism, understood as the view that there is no personal absolute called God, and that humans are products of blind and random evolutionary processes. Let me quote, and in the end, here the great British philosopher John Locke, who in his essays concerning human understanding says that, quote, it is as impossible to conceive that ever pure incogitative matter should produce a thinking, intelligent being, as that nothing should of itself produce matter, unquote. But if Czeżowski's and Ingarden's views are not quite compatible with metaphysical naturalism, then perhaps theism and theistic worldview might be combined better with their views on the ontology of values and human nature. And it is my concluding remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dariusz. Let's react to the talk. Thank you so much for presenting this comparison between the views of the representative of the Lvov-Warsaw School, Tadeusz Czeżowski, and Roman Ingarden on values and metaphysics. And now let me open the discussion. Are there any questions or comments to the paper presented? Witold Płotka.
First of all, thank you for very interesting paper. I really enjoy it. I have a rather historical question. Are there any studies regarding Czeżowski's philosophical connections, discussions while he was in Vilnius at Stefan Batory University? I'm asking because of course, this was Polish-speaking university, and Vilnius at the time there were political tensions between Poland and Lithuanian country, which was re-established just like Poland was at the time, and the only Lithuanian university at the time, Kaunas University, was regarded as originally Lithuanian university, and I'm very curious about interconnections, international interconnections between Polish scholars, especially Czeżowski, Lvov-Warsaw School, and Lithuanian thinkers. Are there any? Because I asked also Lithuanian scholars about this topic, and they said that there are only a little documents about this interconnection. So if you know any, are there any studies of these connections? I will be grateful for suggestions.
Book by Jacek Jadacki about Polish famous philosopher in Vilna or in Vilnius. So perhaps in that book you may find some information about relations between Polish scholars and others. And there is also a book edited by probably Professor Wiśniewski from Toruń, and there is you can find there perhaps something on this topic. But
yeah. The problem, I know the text of Professor Jadacki, of course, but this is, so to speak, using contemporary language, rather colonial reading of Polish philosophy. So there was this Polish philosophy and there was no Lithuanian philosophy at all. But I'm curious about, you know, interactions or
if you think that is similar, then I would say that I don't know other works elaborating this topic, this interest. So perhaps it's the field for new research. So it's my answer to your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question. So if there are no questions from other persons, I will ask for something. Well, you mentioned this long-lasting relationship, close relationship between Ingarden and Czeżowski. For sure, they were friends. There is a big correspondence and so on. And they wrote to each other, kochany Romanie, kochany Tadeuszu, and so on. And for sure, Tadeusz Czeżowski was a classical member of the Lvov-Warsaw school. He was trained in logic. He had a serious results in logic at the beginning, and then he analyzed many philosophical problems with the use of logic. He read Ingarden. He wrote a review of Ingarden's paper. So books. So why Ingarden still thought that he is not read and underestimated by members of the Lvov-Warsaw school? Is it the case that Czeżowski was somehow treated as a not member of the school or something like that? Because if somebody is underestimated in this group, it is Czeżowski and not Ingarden, and that's my opinion. What do you think about it?
Well, perhaps Ingarden was disappointed with Czeżowski's reactions to his main ideas. Czeżowski regarded Ingarden's notion of idea as a concept, and Ingarden accused Czeżowski that he did not distinguish between idea and concept, and simply because Czeżowski, in Ingarden's opinion, made a lot of mistakes by interpreting his work, and therefore Ingarden could feel underestimated by even by Czeżowski in this respect. So they like each other, but Ingarden regarded Czeżowski as a person who did not understand his philosophy correctly. This is the reason.
So I suppose that there were some terminological differences, and Ingarden insisted for his conceptual scheme, his terminological scheme, and that was the main problem between them. But still, even if someone writes critically about someone else's philosophy, still he reads it, yeah. So I don't understand Ingarden's problem, but yeah, perhaps just it was his personality that that is the cause of everything here. Okay, so we still have time for a short question or comment.
And how to translate this Wertigkeit der Werte? This is my question. It was
what do you think?
To native speakers about the possibility of translation in Ingarden's term Wertigkeit der Werte into English, because in Polish it is wartościowość wartości, but I couldn't find an adequate translation from German into English. Perhaps Peter could help me. Wertigkeit der Werte in English.
Wertigkeit. Oh God, there isn't one. It's the valuedness of value. What makes value valuable, I suppose. There isn't a word for Wertigkeit, or not a good one.
Okay.
I can think of. So you're right not to know one, I think.
Oh, thank you.
Wertigkeit sounds almost like Heidegger, I'm afraid. Or maybe Scheler, I don't know.
By Ingarden himself in Das literarische Kunstwerk.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, he obviously, I mean, his German was excellent. So I don't know, sorry.
It would have to be the value of value.
Yeah, the valuability or valuedness of value. There's no nice way to say it in English, so it's obviously not a good concept.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Well, you could use valence. I mean, would make sense, but it's more logical than axiological.
Okay.
So now, of course, terminological differences, which cause the majority of problems in philosophy. So maybe let's skip it for another time.